Welcome, it's the NBA Geeks, and today we're going to be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers and their brand spanking new offense. In any other offseason, Kevin Love would be the biggest acquisition for a team, but for the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're lucky enough to snag the best player alive in LeBron James. You don't need fancy numbers to tell you how good LeBron James is. He's a scoring, passing, rebounding machine that happens to be one of the most efficient players in the NBA also. What's so incredible with LeBron James is not only because he's efficient, but that he's doing it at the fifth highest usage rate in the entire NBA at 30.9%. Alright, let's break down LeBron James' shot chart. You don't need to say much. He's clearly a threat at almost every distance from the floor, and he's absolutely a machine in the paint. He had a 56.7 field goal percentage, and he had an unreal effective field goal percentage rate of 61%. Again, when someone has a usage rate of 30.1% and he has an effective field goal percentage of 61, I mean it's unbelievable. So let's move on to his new teammate and the second biggest move this offseason in Kevin Love. So Kevin Love's critics always go back to his lack of playoff success. They always talk about him putting up big numbers in a Minnesota team that runs an extremely high pace. There is some merit in some of the criticism. For example, I think the rebounding numbers are a bit inflated. If you look at SportsView and the rebounding percentages, he ranks 32nd in the NBA, and Minnesota does run an extremely high pace. Similarly, Chris Bosh used to have a really high rebounding rate when he was with Toronto, and those numbers clearly tapered off when he moved on to Miami. While there's room for some healthy skepticism, there's no denying that Kevin Love could score, he could rebound, and he's probably one of the better passing big men in the NBA. So while some of the numbers may fall off a bit, he's still one of the top 3 power forwards in the NBA. Let's look at Kevin Love's shot chart and how he'll meld with LeBron James. Love is simply one of the best shooters in the NBA, and he fits the prototypical stretch 4. Now that he's paired up with LeBron James and the amount of attention that LeBron James draws, Love's efficiency numbers should increase a bit. With LeBron James' vision and Kevin Love's shooting ability, this will be one of the most dynamic duos we'll see in the NBA. And we're not even including the young budding superstar in Kyrie Irving. Much like Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving has had his own fair share of critics. What worries me most about Kyrie Irving is that his numbers dropped across the boards from last year. There's no denying that he's a very gifted player, but his leadership has been called into question. But now that he's joined by probably one of the best teammates in the NBA in LeBron James, I think that won't be an issue anymore. Kyrie averaged a very solid 20.8 points per game and 6.1 assists per game. Between Kevin Love, LeBron James, and Kyrie Irving, if I were to make a guess on who I think would drop off in points per game, I think it would be Kyrie Irving because his efficiency numbers aren't quite there. Speaking of his efficiency, let's look at Kyrie Irving's shot chart. Like I said, his efficiency pales in comparison to guys like Kevin Love and LeBron James, which is kind of fair because they're amongst the most efficient players in the NBA, but I think his true value will be in his creativity, his ball handling, and his vision. While I'm not a big fan of comparing the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Miami Heat, I do think if we were to do this cross-matching between Kevin Love, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and Kyrie Irving, the one true value that Kyrie Irving brings to the table that Dwayne Wade simply could not is Kyrie Irving's three-point shooting. However, it's not all blue skies for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let me talk about some of the pitfalls that they might face. Like we already talked about, Kevin Love has one of the most impressive shot charts in the NBA, but most of his shots come off on the left side of the court. In and of itself, it's not that big of an issue, but when we dig a little deeper into the rest of the players on that team, it does bring up a couple of questions. While Kyrie's shot distribution may not show that he has any preference on either side of the court, he's clearly more efficient on the left side of the court. And like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love, LeBron James has a pretty strong preference on the left side of the court. You can even add Dion Waiters onto the list of players who prefer the left side of the floor. And while Shawn Marion doesn't have any real preference because he doesn't have much of a mid-range game, his three-point shooting comes off on the left side of the floor. So you're probably asking, what does this even mean and why does it even matter? Well, it turns out that their stiffest competition in the Eastern Conference, the Chicago Bulls, runs a special style of defense, the Thibodeau defense, that specializes in sending a lot of bodies on the strong side, which will be the left side, and playing this quasi-zone defense that'll force the ball to be moved to the right side. And this is where Chris Bosh comes in. So you're probably asking, how did the Miami Heat combat this? Well, it turns out Chris Bosh has a pretty strong preference on the right side of the court. How often did we see Chris Bosh wide open on the right side of the court? And it turns out that this wasn't something that Chris Bosh even had to adjust to. It turns out when he played for the Raptors, he had a pretty strong preference on the right side as well. So on the Miami Heat, Chris Bosh was always wide open as a safety valve on the right side. Here's a pretty cool graphic by Kirk Goldsberry of Grantland that superimposes their preferences onto one chart. Look, while I don't think that this will be a deal breaker, I think that the fact that their stiffest competition in the Eastern Conference is playing a defense that's essentially built to try to stop this kind of offense is something that's worth being concerned over. Another thing worth noting is the usage rates. When the Miami Heat came together, the one thing people kept bringing up was the fact that there's only one basketball. But what we're about to see from the Cleveland Cavaliers is completely unprecedented. There are going to be 4 guys that ranked in the top 17 last year in usage rates. Since there's only one basketball, we're probably going to see a lot of catch and shoot situations. This is where it gets a little bit concerning because Kyrie Irving only averaged 35.6% off of his catch and shoot situations, and that was good enough for 168th in the NBA. Dion Waiters and Kevin Love were a bit better at 41.9 and 41.1% respectively. There's a ton to be optimistic for if you're a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, but there's also some questions that need to be answered. Thank you for listening. This was the NBA Geeks. Please like this video and subscribe.